say we take 5. Well, because by the time they get online, and then we're going right to our council meeting, and then probably right back to committee of the whole, right?
Yeah, well, council not for another 42 minutes.
All right, if I can get a motion to come out of recess.
Motion to come out of recess.
I have a motion from Councilman Lundin and a second from Councilman Holmgren to come out of recess. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. That motion carries 5-0. So let's see, we're going to move on now to the 2025 budget updates.
Mayor and council, it's a somewhat short list of budget updates. First and foremost, health insurance renewal was particularly good to us. 5% down is great. Since we switched to PEEP, I think what is our 5 or 6 year average has been like 1.57%. So that's been fantastic. So that definitely helps. Dental renewal is between 2 and 2.75%. So that's not bad. That was also less than I had been projecting. I found a couple formula corrections I realized in my workbook weren't updating correctly, so you see that noted on the second page there. Then we get to, we had some employee updates, right? As you know, when the first draft comes out, I understand a certain list of people working here, and as that changes, then those things change. So we've got that in there. Based on my understanding of most recent fire budget discussions, looks like we'll probably be closer to 312 for the year rather than 322. So we can sure write that in. Also, then we've got added cost for elections that'll end up in there. I've got updated pricing on the heated beer cave door, and of course, as soon as I put this in the memo, Keith came to me and said, "Hey, I got another idea. I think we can use an air curtain to keep this from being a problem." I said, "That sounds great. That's a lot cheaper, but before you do anything, you need to be able to prove to me that it's actually going to solve the problem, not just make the problem less." So he's looking into other stores that have already put one in, and whether or not he can actually verify that that will solve the problem rather than just make it less of a problem.
I have a question on that, and that one to me stuck out. I don't know if we've ever talked about this specifically, but paying an extra $10,000 for a door is not gonna increase our sales. So why do it? That's the question.
Because the problem is the condensation that we have.
Yep.
And it is already damaging the concrete on the floor. This
okay.
is the problem. And thus far, I've just been thankful that we didn't put tile in, because all the tile would be completely ruined. And once you start that moisture, short of shutting down and getting totally dry, you wouldn't be able to put the tile back. So I think we're in an okay spot, but that beer cave, it's either gonna need an air curtain, if that works, or barring that, a heated door, so that we don't have moisture problems at that door perpetually, especially in the summer. So, but we're gonna have to do something before we start really having problems with if you're ever over there, the most prominent spot that you'll see right away is when you walk into that beer cave, on the lower right-hand corner, you look down at the floor, you can already see where the metal is not really enjoying its time in the concrete right there, let's say it that way. So, and for a relatively new store, I'd rather not see that at all.
Okay.
So,
I just thought it was maybe just a cosmetic item. I haven't noticed the concrete, I guess, but yeah, it's, okay.
yeah, and we had the same problem when I was in Granite. We had the same problem at the liquor store in Granite, and there we never went for the heated door because it was too much money, and we perpetually had problems with the tile. There we had tile, and it's a real problem, you know, because then you can't, moving carts around, moving pallets around, any of that stuff is more difficult. So at some point, we need to address something there.
I think the air curtain, they use them a lot in a lot of places, so.
Yeah, and I'm okay with that. And the air curtain is like a lot cheaper, you know, like a fraction of the 20 grand for the heated door. So that would be great. But like I told Keith, that like you need to prove that it's going to work before we drop that money. Otherwise, we're just going to spend both, and we're not going to do that.
Are they I think I'm a little familiar with air curtains. They're up above the door and they push air straight down?
Yep.
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 You go through
They
them.
work, and they're very reliable. It's just a matter of getting the timing right on them.
Yep. So, yeah, as long as he can prove that works, great. We'll, spend like $3,000 on that instead of 20 grand on a door. That sounds great, as long as it actually fixes the problem. Yep.
I think it might do the trick.
He seems to think so, and all I said was.
They have to be timed when the door,
You gotta prove it, that's
it's
all.
gotta be timed when the door opens. So when the door starts to open, that air curtain
Right.
starts immediately. So controls can be a little tricky, but I think it'd
Exactly.
be wisely
Yeah.
spent.
So at least for right now, until I hear more from Keith, we'll leave the heated door there so that he's got that solution as a fallback, but we'll certainly try to spend considerably less. A minor update to Rural Water Association dues. Kind of surprised it took them that long. I don't remember the last time I saw a rate change in that. Literally going back to Granite, I don't remember ever seeing a rate change on that, so. So that's what you should expect when we come back around to the budget. That's what you should expect. One thing that's not in the memo that would be helpful to know is, would you guys like a full review at November COW ahead of the December 3rd meeting? Or do we feel comfortable with where we're at? Or how do we want to proceed? Because this is about what fits for council.
I would say bring it for review.
Okay.
Because
Me
we
too.
may have a different council.
They don't take effect till January, though.
Mine takes
That is a
effect
good-
in,
That's a good
No.
point. I hadn't actually thought about that, but yeah.
my seat, November 19th would be my last meeting.
Mm-hmm,
It's a special.
mm-hmm.
So
Okay. Well,
as
I'll
long
plan
as
on-
that's factored into that decision,
Well, either way, I'll just plan on bringing like the full documents to
Okay.
COW on November, second meeting in November, whatever date that is.
Sounds good.
And then we'll go from there and at least make sure everybody's up to date on what has and has not changed. And we've got some other changes that we'll talk about next, but I got those categorized differently.
I have a question about the lull bucket. Do they have a anticipated use for that? And what size it is? I mean,
Yeah, Matt thinks the single task that would be most beneficial, and he can imagine using it for a bunch of stuff, but his single task was using it to spread wood chips. He thinks being able to stay off of other surfaces while you're doing that, he thinks would be particularly helpful. And so that's just if council's on board with that, they'd like to do it. And if not, they'll continue to do the things that they've been doing. But Public Works they seem to think that, probably less than 4, but they think that is a good investment in efficiency, so.
do you know how much that lull can lift? I don't remember. I mean, obviously, it depends how far you extend and all that. Okay,
Yeah, if you've got it fully extended, it's less,
right,
so, but it's a big piece of equipment.
yeah.
I'm sure it lifts a fair amount. Another thing, well, here, we'll skip around a little bit. Just to make you aware, one thing I asked Matt to do was look into a MyOx system service contract. We have never been offered one. To our knowledge, nobody actively does that. But considering the amounts that we're talking about and the frequency of potentially having to replace it, I said, why don't you find out? Because if they're willing to do it for, say, 10 grand a year, as much as that sounds like a lot of money, if it
not.
keeps it going for another 10 years, that's actually a real bargain. And maybe we can talk somebody into that. It probably is gonna mean getting somebody to fly here from Texas or wherever, but, so just to know that we're looking into that, and if we think that there's something to discuss, it'll come back around. If you never hear about it again, it's because it fizzled and we just can't get anybody to bite. But we're gonna try.
On the lull bucket, sorry to go back to that, can we specify only used on that? To only buy a used one?
Yeah, the $4,000 is used.
Okay,
Yep, that was, yeah, and Josh and I just did that by quick Google search.
okay,
It was not a complex thing, we just are like, well, for sure, based on this, we can for sure get it for under 4, so let's roll with that. And if we can get it for 2 or whatever, yeah. Now, this is another item that had been brought up, it's not in the budget currently. There was an ask for new council iPads And that, council iPads had been up previously, and the consensus at the time was, yeah, they're good enough. But then there was also a question about whether or not, if we got new iPads, whether or not they could have service all the time. To make council aware, that'd be about $50 per device. Multiply that out, you're looking at about $3,000 per year. But then those would be like cellular. It would be basically unlimited data for all the 5 council iPads. So if that's something we want in there, I need to know, but
I think for what we use it for, we all have our own cell phones, but a data-only plan, you can get 5 gigs through T-Mobile, business account, $25 a month per iPad, which would be a lot less than the 3,000. And the device, I think, I know the city is, they're all Apple, but I think council should vote on whether they want to go Android or Apple when the time comes to do it.
yeah, and for the pricing, all I do is just go to our Verizon account, we get a government deal on that. So whether it was Apple or Android, you'd be looking at a similar range.
Can you open up a new account with T-Mobile?
I don't think there's anything preventing that, no.
What?
I don't think that there's anything preventing that.
Okay, yeah, because that would be my recommendation. T-Mobile has the best coverage in Isani, and we all live in Isani.
Yes, so she brings up a good point. We can go to T-Mobile, but we would have to have new iPads.
Right.
Because the current ones are not cellular.
Yeah, and these are,
Yeah.
I don't really see a reason to, like you said, we all have, I mean, right now,
Wi-Fi at
we have Wi-Fi, or you got a hotspot on your phone, or whatever it might be. but-
I would also like to add with the agenda packet system we have, it's specific to Apple. So the Granicus app that you use to see your packets, it's specific to Apple.
I'm personally happy with what we have, other than them being kind of a pain sometimes. But for the money, it's,
I have it on my phone. I downloaded that app, and I got an Android phone, so I could look at the agenda off my phone through iLegislate. That's the one I have. It's just called a different app through Android.
News to me, because they told me that it's only for Apple.
Yeah, well, I think when I searched it, because I wanted to be able to look at the agenda on the road and refresh myself on it, and, yeah, it's called iLegislate. But, yeah. I think that's a conversation for committee of the whole, if we want to do that anyway. I don't think it's something we need to discuss now, but are you saying to keep it in the budget?
No,
maybe,
right
to
now,
do it?
that's not in the budget, and you guys don't have to make a decision on that. If you want to roll that around in your minds until November and give me a firm
Sure.
yes or no at that point, we can do that. But now you have some general understanding of what the cost implications would be. And you can think about that. Yeah, I don't have anything else I need to say on this item.
On the MyOx service plan, did you say you don't know of anybody that actually does that currently?
We have never had a vendor offer that. Usually, if there's a service contract to be had, they're gonna tell you all about it. But I think it's worth trying to entice somebody to doing something they maybe don't normally do. And if it makes financial sense, then it'll come back. But if it's possible, the vendors will be like, no, it doesn't matter how much you pay us. I've had vendors say that to me in the past. Particularly, I had a software issue in Granite Falls at our community center, and they didn't offer service. I said, well, based on what I'm gonna have to pay to get different software, I would be happy to pay you $5,000 a year. And they said no, amazingly. But, so we will try our best is basically what we're gonna try and do. And hopefully we come up with something, but if we don't, we don't.
Sounds good. All right, any other questions for Mike on the budget updates? So essentially, the changes that we had there were pretty much a wash, total.
It's
$5,000 extra or something like that, yeah.
It's pretty close. Yeah, you see, actually, I should maybe point that out. Maybe that doesn't make sense to everybody else. On the second page at the bottom, right, we've got a listing of accounts and adopted budget, updated budget, blah, blah, blah. Underneath, we've got what the net effect is by fund for just insurance renewal, health and dental, and then the total effect, which would be all of the changes listed above by fund. So in the end, Fund 101 is spending, is 25 grand less than what we had budgeted, right? That, the negative number is a savings. So, in case-
But then we spent more in the other,
yep,
yeah.
yep, yeah, and the 602, 603, that's just the formula error is ends up being the issue there, where it didn't sum all of that column, it skipped the bottom values. So, but now is a good time to catch that, not after the fact, so.
So without those extra items like the iPad and the lull bucket and stuff, we're roughly, what does it look like, $8,000 roughly under budget?
Well, when you see the total effect, all changes, and 101 is at negative 25.
Yep,
That does not, iPads are not in this.
correct,
Low bucket's not in this.
Correct.
MyX is not in this. Yep.
correct. Okay.
Yep, yeah,
So-
so you, as long as we're covering that,
Yep.
yes, then you're thinking of this, yeah.
Yep,
You're almost 10,000 still less than original.
Oh, yeah, no, I know.
yep.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean we have to spend it, though.
No. All right,
Cool.
thank you, Mike. Moving on to E3, street project updates. Or it's not E3 anymore, but the
item,
next
right?
topic.
So this one is a little more wonky. Basically, Jason and I are just looking to consolidate projects of a particular type into particular years so that you're gonna get a better bid price, right? If I bid a project where I've got, some of it's reclaimed, some of it's mill and overlay, but this portion over here is actually crack fill. When you group those things together, you can have a bigger project for that type and you can get a little better pricing, right? So we reorganize those to make that a little bit easier. And so we just very straightforward list this out. It changes our numbers, in which year everything falls. But out of all of that, the biggest change in the plan is South Passage. South Passage is not going to make it where it had been originally queued up. It was queued up for 12 years out and as a mill and overlay. That is not gonna work. I'm glad we're catching it now, but it is what it is. It's already crocodiled. It's a particularly smooth ride, but, right, crocodile, everybody understands, right? Jason's opinion is, it is a complete waste of money to do anything else to that road unless it is a reclaim. Seal coating it, crack filling it, even a mill and overlay is money that we're gonna throw away. We are not gonna get the useful life out of any of those treatments that you would otherwise want. So the biggest thing is moving that South Passage up to 2027, and we're hoping that we can make it to that long. We're hopeful.
I have a quick question about
Yep.
that. You know, that is one of the main in and out of town
It's a
roads.
very busy road.
And how much is the city portion of that compared to the resident share of it? Is it the same formula somebody would have that lived in the middle of a neighborhood that a road hardly ever gets used, except by the neighbors themselves?
Yeah, so the assessment policy is pretty standard, right? It's based on your frontage, and if you've got a corner lot, then you pay full, short, half long. But on South Passage, the council is probably going to have to consider how those parcels are adjacent and how much frontage they have. Probably adopting assessments as they are currently written in the policy might not be the way that council would want to go.
I don't think it's fair to do it that way on that road, just because of how much it's used by the whole half of the city.
Yep.
And
And that's part of the reason we have a dedicated street levy in the first place, right, is because everybody's driving on everything. I had the exact same thought. So what I've already put into the capital improvement plan is we'll call it significantly discounted special assessment rate below what the policy would prescribe.
sure,
And I did that basically based on my assumption that I think that once you guys get into the project and look at what the numbers would be based on the policy, I don't think that you will adopt those numbers.
does the other side of this street does not belong to the city, right?
Some of it is, some of it isn't.
Yeah, so if it's south of Hickory, it's not, but the
Okay.
rest is.
Because the other problem is like you were just saying, most of those properties are 5-acre lots or 2.5-acre lots. So they all have a lot of frontage. They're gonna get hit really
So,
hard.
there will be different options for you guys to consider when we get to
Okay.
that project. One thing that has been done here before, and we were never the first city to do it, and we will never be the last, is you simply say, you know what? This is the dollar amount that I think feels appropriate as an assessment. And whether you have 75 feet of frontage or 750 feet of frontage, you're just gonna pay this amount. That's been done here in Iceni before, and it will be done in other cities forever, right? Generally, I advise don't change assessment policy, because the 2 acres people are associated with that. If you're the first or the last, you're pissed. But there is also a time where you look at what is prescribed and you say, well, the first or last might be upset, but right now I got 17 that are really upset, right? Those are the instances where deviating from your policy makes sense. We'll have time for that, right? Because that's a 2027 project. We'll have Jason queue up plans at the end of 2026, and we'll have an opportunity for him to present, here's how this would calculate per year of policy, and what do you guys want to see on
Sure.
that? Yep. That's the biggest change, is pulling that project forward so many years has tweaked it, and that does then move the projected levy up. Where's my notes? So basically, if I'm gonna net this out between this discussion item and the last one for the budget updates, prelim, what we adopted in September, we said, all right, we're gonna use fund balance of about 159,000 was what, I'm rounding it off, but 159,000. With this one, we see the general fund levy go down, the street levy go up, and instead of 159,000, we'd be using about 172,000. Was how that would net out. So it's not wildly different than what we had previously proposed. But this does get us to reorder these, hopefully get better prices, and give us an opportunity to pull South Passage forward, because South Passage cannot wait 12 years.
And that's not any sort of like state aid or any sort of grant money we could get for that one?
I don't think so. I can double check with Jason. There are rules about how often you can move those roads and how many miles a segment you get. And we've reorganized those a few times to try to maximize the incidence and the number of times that a project would fall onto a state road. We've already kind of played that game, but it's also not a game that ever quite ends.
How did the city pull off the state aid for Palomino Road? I know they had to put that sidewalk in on one side was one of it, but
Yeah, that
I
was.
know that we had to change the
that all-
diameter of the water
that all-
going out to the east side.
That all started before me, so I can't speak to any of the discussions on that. I
Okay.
wasn't here. By the time I got here, the project was substantively done. I think all I did was pay out retainage.
Well, if you have,
So,
I know you're really busy, but if you have time to take just a real quick look at it and see if there's anything similar we can do over there.
yeah, it was after that, oh gosh, probably 2019, that Jason and I went through and reorganized all of our state aid roads as much as we could to be able to, because if you've got one that you know is coming up in 2 years for work, and you know is gonna need work again in 8, but it's not a state aid, I wanna make that one a state aid now, just in the nick of time, so that I can clip 2 projects with it, right? I don't wanna have a state aid route that doesn't have another project scheduled for 12 years, right? I want the incidents to happen as early as possible and as frequently as possible on ones where the state's gonna cover it. So that's how we've been aiming.
So to clarify, you are looking into making that a state aid road, or?
I will
Or
I will
hoping
ask
to,
Jason
or-
about it. I don't think that, I'm gonna bet that we can't. Because once you make a designation, there's a certain amount of time that you have to wait, and then there are certain criteria around the road that allow for it to be state aid. You can't just pick any road.
It
And
has
once
to
you
be a
desi-
certain width.
It's
and
not
it
wide
has to
enough
be-
right now.
Yeah,
Well, it could be. I mean,
It's-
there's.
I'll double check
Oh,
with
it could
Jason,
be.
but my bet is Jason would have told me about that straight away. But that doesn't mean he doesn't miss something once in a while. So I'll follow up with him, but.
Honestly,
bet
that
he would've
road
told me.
needs to be wider.
Oh,
as
it's
much
way
traffic
too
it
narrow.
has. And I don't, in that circumstance, those properties on both sides of that road actually have property to donate a little bit compared to what they did on Palomino. It took half of their front yards away, all the way down. I mean, that wouldn't be the case on this road, and it would be if we're planning for the future, we might wanna look into that.
Well, and remember too, is ahead of those, ahead of a project like that, especially a reclaim, we're gonna have an open house. Jason's gonna
Right.
make his pitch about, hey, here's what's currently planned, does this look good, does it not look good, is there, and there'll be an opportunity for all those property owners to make comment, and and this is a good reminder for any of those meetings at any point in the future. If people can't make it, they should, send me an email, or give a council member a note, or whatever. I mean, we can still read those things and enter them in the record, just like any other meeting. Just because they can't make a particular open house, that doesn't mean don't participate.
I just had somebody from Cambridge message me today about that because they got a $9,000 assessment for like a sidewalk, and he couldn't make it to the meeting, and he didn't know that he could write in and they could speak for him. So now he's just stuck with it, and there's,
Every city should just be doing that, just as a
Right.
matter of, being ethical,
yep.
like a good neighbor thing,
So we gotta make sure when that comes, I think we should always be very, very clear on the assessments, because the fact that he didn't know that he was gonna get
Yeah.
hit that hard, that's
Yeah.
a fairly decent
Yeah,
chunk of money.
Most projects in town end up, by the time you figure out frontage and you're in relatively small lots in town, right? Not our 5-acre lots to the south there, but, usually we end up in amounts that, per month are, $18 to $24 a month. It's like, okay, this assessment is on par with Netflix, it's not super burdensome, right? But, yeah, when you start getting, if you've got a $9,000 assessment and you've got 10 years to pay, that's no Netflix subscription, so.
That was Cambridge, thankfully not Isani, so.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of complaints from Cambridge.
Yeah, about
people
assessments
about
and
that.
not being clear on things, and, yeah, they need to live stream more stuff too. But,
And the biggest complaints I've had on our street projects has been about, one person got assessed and they saw work happening on another road and they want to know why that person didn't get assessed. And it's just about explaining that we assess on reclaims or rehabilitations, right? The full redo. Mill and overlay is no, seal coating is no, crack filling is no. That's maintenance that we all share in that cost, and that's that. But when you're getting a definitively new road with new curb and gutter and potentially new sidewalk and those things, then those are the projects that are accessible. That's the number one complaint that I get, and it's just people not knowing the difference.
I actually just had somebody ask me that question the other day too, and I said, I would imagine it's all assessed the same, but, so just the general street levy
It's
covers the maintenance,
When you're
not.
getting a
it's just
definitively new road, it's
reclaim.
assessed. All the maintenance, no. don't
Just
assess
general,
maintenance.
okay.
so I have a question on the seal coat 2026. How often are we seal coating? I see Broadway streets on there, and I feel like that was just done last year. Is that a different section of Broadway Street, maybe on the west side of the tracks?
Yeah, it would not be, if it was done 2 years ago, it would not be again.
Okay, so it must be on
You're
the,
you're generally looking at 7 or 8 years between activities, right? So I might do a mill and overlay, and I do a seal coat, eventually I get 8 years out, I do a mill and overlay, then it's another 8. So those two seal coats end up being 16 years apart with a mill and overlay halfway.
okay.
So we'd never do 2 years apart.
So the-
You might do every other year on your driveway, but not,
Okay,
No,
so that
it's-
Broadway Street on here must be on the west side of the tracks. It's not specified, but,
yeah, I can ask.
Okay.
Yeah, we can talk to Jason about what the very specific segment is. I tried to put in the specific segments to the extent that I knew them.
Yep.
From our somewhat brief conversation, but
Okay, what's the thought process there, I guess? I mean, having to use more from, and it's just I would imagine there'll be times in the future then where there would be less that would be required to be used in other years, but because we're moving some things forward in order to kind of rearrange things is why you're having that situation come up, right?
yeah,
So-
and and this is another thing that Jason and I just talked about. He was like, hey, make sure you remind him. I'm like, yes, it's in my head. Remember too is that basically what you're seeing on this document here through 2028 mostly 2027, but 2028, I mean, this is work that was a lot of this stuff was identified in 2010 and nothing happened with it through 2019 before I picked it up and said, well, okay, here's why this isn't happening. Nobody ever identified revenues. We have to do this stuff. So now we're getting through that glut. And there is gonna be an opportunity when we get through this, bulge of work, there'll be an opportunity to have a little more breathing room. And then also, once we get to 2030 and we see, was it September 2030, the abatement or the BMX bond is over, that's $200,000 savings. So I think in the future, there'll be an opportunity to be able to scale back the street construction levy and have it be a permanent and downward, right? But we got to get there, and part of the problem is making up for work that just didn't get done for a number of years, unfortunately. But we're making good progress. I'm pretty darn excited for September of 2030, to be honest. It's going to feel pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense to probably move things forward and try to rearrange things so that we're getting, better bids and getting more of that type of work done when they're here, but what do you guys think? Yeah?
Yep.
All right. That sounds good. Thank you, Mike. Moving on to E4, the rate study update. Well, it's not E4 anymore.
Well, yeah,
I'm gonna
next
stop.
item.
The next item, yes. I gotta stop saying the number.
Sure, I'm pulling. All right, so in your packet, you've got the rate study I presented in July. And at the time, I said, well, I think this is kind of like the minimum that I think gives us a chance for success. And like I was telling Councilmember Heeman before this, usually when I go through a rate study and I present a recommendation, usually I'm confident enough in it that I don't spend any time thinking about it after the fact. That has not been the case. I'm spending a lot of time thinking about this. I'm not comfortable with my own recommendation. I think it needs to be higher.
So do I.
I hate to say that because I know people don't like that. But when I look at what we definitively will be spending money on in the future to continue to provide water, we have to come up with something more. And for the original presented rate study had us at the end of 2028 with negative 109,000 available for capital. 109,000 in, people terms, household budget terms, that's a bunch of money. But in a capital plan for a water utility, that's pretty close to zero, right? It's not substantively different than zero. But I feel like we need to make a swing in a different direction and be a little more certain about where we're going to be in 2028. One of the things that I spend time thinking about here is we've had good success getting our largest water users to back off on the irrigation. That's been good. But we are still going to need a well in the near future. And hopefully we can continue to keep that per capita rate down, preferably under 80, preferably. But as things stand right now, we do have 2 bond issues in the water fund. They're a few years out, and they won't be paid with taxes. They'll be paid with water, water charges. It'll be the people using the water are the ones that are paying for it. And if you use less water, you'll pay less toward it. If you use more, you'll pay more toward it. So there's a measure of equity in that. But that doesn't mean I really like issuing bonds anyway. If nothing else, this helps to give us a little bit of certainty, be a little more conservative in how we move forward. And if we get to a point where we say, well, geez, Mike said we'd have 173,000 available for CIP, and we just went gangbusters through 2028. Costs are down, operating expenses are down. You know, the amounts we thought we were gonna spend on CIP were projected too high, we ended up coming in under, and we end up with a stack of cash there. As far as I'm concerned, all that means is I'm gonna issue a smaller bond. I will contribute more cash to the project and borrow less. Fiscally, I think that's a good idea. Issuing bonds for water revenue bonds isn't unlike issuing street bonds, and it really ends up getting to be the buy three, get one free. That's still a good rule of thumb, even when you're talking about water revenue bonds. So you are not making any choices tonight, right? This is something that goes by by ordinance, right? This is in code. So this is something we will have to decide before the end of the year. But I felt like this is kind of my last opportunity to be able to share my reservations about my own recommendation from July. So I laid out a couple alternatives. If I was the only one making the decision, to be honest, I would go with alternative 2.
I agree.
The other thing I would remind, and for council members especially, when you're gonna have somebody's gonna be watching this, and somebody's gonna talk in your ear about it. Do remind them that we went 4 years without raising the rates at all. We didn't change them at all, and that was during a time when our operating costs, the inflationary operating costs, are going up, you know, between 5 and 10% a year. You know, that was a good thing for residents to have that little reprieve when everything else in their life was going way up. That was good. But we do still have to pay the bills.
Well, and since that time, like you said, I mean, all of the costs to maintain everything has gone up and the usage has gone up. I mean, you know,
I still think I don't know about this overarching percentage change. I think we really need to hit the high users like twice as heavy, because that'll lower the usage, hopefully extending our, you know.
So what we've done a good job just asking, you know, without anything else, right? Just ask. There is in this, remember, in the rate study that I presented in July, there is a 4th tier. That 4th tier goes up in step with the others. The others each go by a 25% increment, so the rate is 25% above the prior, and that 4th tier just matches that. So that would be another option if council is like, you know what, don't have that 4th tier to be a 25% up from the prior tier, make it 50.
Yes.
Something like that, that's fine. The only thing we do need to think about is there are going to be users that genuinely need it for their business. And that could be addressed any number of ways, right? It could be something that we cleverly write into the fee schedule or into water rates. We could simply look at if a business owner needs to come and make their case, right? Council can just say, this is a tier that doesn't apply to you. You have an exemption, this is official, here's how this goes. Now, how we would do that, would need to be in code, or if you guys could just do it by resolution, I'd have to work that out, but there are ways to be creative. But
and Mike, so 2025 is what you're thinking, a new well would come in online is what we're shooting for there? Is that the
yeah, I
reason
mean,
for
they're
that
doing
increase?
Yeah, they're doing the hydrology and geology and the topography and all that stuff
Right.
right now, so.
Then 28 is the water tower? Is that the,
I'd have to double check. Okay.
but those 2 years are really where we've got, you know, the giant amount of cash that we need.
Yeah, and we've got, you know, and this is the other thing, is, I mean, everything that is on the schedule is going to happen. It's just a question of, can we push it out, and how far can we push it out? Asking people to just use less water has worked really well, and that is helping, but that's just not gonna be the only, that won't be the only thing, it can't be the only thing. But it has worked surprisingly well to just ask.
Yeah. All right.
So, yeah, we don't need to take action, but if you have questions, please ask. Otherwise, think about it, mull it over in your head, think about the things that you might want to see different. And we will definitely need to be discussing this in November and perhaps again in December. Yep.
Okay. Any other questions right now? Otherwise, I'll look for a motion to go into recess, and we'll get ready for our council meeting.
Motion to go into recess.
Second.
I have a motion from Councilman Merrill and a second from Councilman Holmgren. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. That motion carries 5-0. We're in recess for that meeting, and we'll jump into city council here shortly.